and start recording. Okay. Can everyone see that and can everyone hear me okay? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see this and hear what I'm saying. Okay, great. Thanks, Gabrielle, Brooklyn. Great. Thank you. Okay. If at any point you have questions, please just unmute yourself. It's hard for me to pull up the chat when I'm sharing my screen like this. So feel free to unmute yourself. You are connected to my headset, so it's not playing through the speaker in class, okay? Now, the basics of photosynthesis. So almost all plants are photosynthetic, autotrophs, but plants aren't the only things that on our planet that perform photosynthesis. So there are other organisms like euglena, which are protists, kelp, cyanobacteria, that are also autotrophs, okay? What I want you to do is highlight this word autotroph. So underline it, highlight it, whatever you need to do, okay? Because that is an important vocabulary word for this chapter. An autotroph, like if a plane is on autopilot, who's flying it? Right, okay. So it is in theory flying itself, right? Okay, or you don't need to be actively flying it, okay? Autotrophs generate their own energy, okay? And by doing that, okay, they are not consuming other organisms in the ecosystem. Through this process, then, autotrophs are converting sunlight into chemical energy. Am I going to be able to do this? Nope. So through this process, autotrophs take the energy from sunlight and convert that energy into chemical energy that other living things can use. Now, of course, plants use that energy as well. So it's not like they're just making it for other things. They're making it for themselves as well. Okay? Now, the energy of sunlight then is stored in chemical bonds. And when energy is stored that way, cells can utilize that energy to do work. And so living things can then break apart these bonds in order to release a universal source of energy that we call ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Okay? Now we're going to be building to that. We're going to talk a lot about ATP. Okay? But for right now, we're going to focus on this first piece of the puzzle, which is photosynthesis. Okay? The picture that is going to be on the screen next should look very familiar to you. This is very similar to the image from Model 1 from yesterday. So I'm going to ask, if you are on Zoom, I'm going to ask you guys this question, okay? So if you're in class, we're just going to listen, okay? And I'll repeat what's said, okay? If you look at this picture of a leaf, what is drawn as entering the leaf? What is entering the leaf in this picture?
The sugar.
Carbon dioxide.
Great. Carbon dioxide, that's one. So carbon dioxide, what else?
Sun.
The sunlight, excellent. Sunlight,
Water.
excellent. Yes, and then finally water. So you got all three. Carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And you can see that from the arrow. So water is coming up from the roots. Carbon dioxide is coming into the leaf through the air. And then sunlight, of course, is hitting the surface of the leaf. Okay? Those are the raw materials that plants use to create food or glucose. Okay? So what are the three things coming out of the leaf then? And now this time we'll go to class. So what are the three things coming out of the leaf? Give me one. Mariah. Oxygen, good. Christian, sugars, good. Yeah, water. There we go. Now, oxygen uh, and water, it appears that those are actually leaving the leaf, right? Where's the sugar going? Where's the sugar going, Nathan? Yeah, it's going down the stem to the roots. So the leaves are creating sugar and then sending that sugar to the rest of the plant. Now, for other organisms to access that sugar, you have to eat the plant. And that's why a large proportion of our diets are, in one way or another, coming from plants. Okay? Even if you're eating, say, a cheeseburger, okay? That meat, right? That meat came from an animal, a cow, and if you're eating a hamburger or a cheeseburger, right? Where did the cow get its energy from to build its body? Yeah, somebody said it already. Nathan, what did you say? From plants. Correct. So ultimately, in terrestrial ecosystems, we can always trace energy back to the sun through plants. Okay? Now, what I've added to the bottom there in red is what we call a chemical equation. So that is the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Now, most of the molecules in that equation should look familiar to you. But what I want you to do is write in the names of them under the chemical symbols. So for example, 6CO2, what does CO2 stand for? Carbon dioxide. Right, so you'd write carbon dioxide under CO2. So you need 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O. How do we write out H2O? What is H2O? Water, okay? And then the way you read this is 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus light energy yields, that's how you read that arrow pointing to the right, C6H12O6 plus 6O2. All right, so then on the product side, C6H12O6, what is that? What is that? Sugar. Yeah, it's a carbohydrate. It's glucose, a simple sugar. Now, what is O2? Oxygen. Yeah, it's just two oxygens bonded together. Okay? So plants need sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And if they have those ingredients, they can produce glucose and oxygen. Good. Now, when you're looking at a chemical equation, right? When you're looking at a chemical equation, the left side of the arrow is called the reactants. Reactants. And the right side of the arrow is called the products. So from now on, instead of saying raw materials, what I will say to you is, what are the reactants of photosynthesis? Or what are the products of photosynthesis? And that's what I'm referring to, okay? Products are on the right, reactants are on the left, okay? Any questions before I move on? Okay. So now we get to the point where you have to think about, okay, how is this happening? Well, the first step that we have to acknowledge is that photosynthetic organisms are usually green. Now I say usually because they're not always green, okay? Plants often appear green because the organelles called chloroplasts, where photosynthesis takes place, produce a pigment called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll absorbs red and blue wavelengths of light, but it does not absorb green wavelengths of light. So what happens is red and blue are absorbed, green is reflected. So to our eyes, leaves appear green. Plants, many plants do in general, okay? Because of that reflection, okay? So the color of light you see is the color that is not absorbed, which makes sense, right? If green was absorbed too, then plants would not appear green. Now, chloroplasts, their job is to absorb light energy and convert it into chemical energy. Okay? Now, we already said I can go stand out in the yard and I'm not going to photosynthesize. I cannot convert sunlight into chemical energy. Sunlight cannot power my cells. Okay? But plants can convert sunlight into a form of energy that living things can use. And that's why they're so important. So, photosynthesis is the process by which autotrophic organisms use light energy to make sugar and oxygen gas from carbon dioxide and water. What I want you to do, put a big star on this slide. It's so important. Not only does it have a great summary of photosynthesis on it, but it's got the chemical equation written out for you. Okay? Why do you think this chemical equation is written on a leaf? Why is it written on a leaf? Now, a lot of people are still writing, so I'll give you a second to think. There you go. All right, so Nathan suggested this is written on a leaf because that's where photosynthesis happens. Okay? And that's correct. So photosynthesis is mainly happening in a leaf. Now, if you had to, yeah, so people are writing, so let's say 30 seconds, and then we'll start back up. Thumbs up if you're ready. Good. Okay. So most people tend to think about, or let's think about it this way. How many hours are in a day? 24, right? How do we tend to break up that day? Like, what are some words we might use? Yeah. Yeah, morning, noon, and then nighttime. Okay. What's the difference? What's the biggest difference between like morning or noon and night? What's the biggest difference? Yeah. Sunlight, right? During the day, there's light out, quite a bit of it. And at night, it's darker. There's no sunlight, right? Just like we break our days in, or normally we break our days into daytime and nighttime, right? Photosynthesis occurs in two steps too. And this is one time where scientists didn't try to confuse things. They just literally called it what it is. And so photosynthesis is broken down into light reactions and then the dark reactions, light and dark. The dark reactions are also called the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin, if somebody says Calvin cycle or the dark reactions, they're saying the same thing. They're synonyms. The light reactions are sometimes called the light dependent reactions. So what happens in these two steps? Okay, well, in the light reactions, which occur in the chloroplasts, the light reactions convert solar energy into chemical energy. Okay? And they produce ATP and NADPH. Okay. Now, I'm sure we need to put the brakes on there and say, I don't know what NADPH is. I'll explain that to you in a minute. Okay. Now, once the light cycle has finished, then the Calvin cycle can begin. The Calvin cycle is actually where sugar is made from carbon dioxide. Okay. So in the Calvin cycle, that energy that you create using sunlight is used to create a sugar for sugar synthesis. Okay. The NADPH, remember that thing, that molecule that I said the light reactions produce? Its role is to provide the electrons needed to reduce carbon dioxide into glucose. Now, when I use the word reduce, that just means add electrons. So it's kind of counterintuitive. It's the opposite, okay? And what happens is the H at the end of NADPH is bonded then to the carbon and the oxygen and carbon dioxide. And that allows us to create a molecule of sugar. Okay? If you look at the dark reactions, okay, the dark reactions take CO2, CO2, and they create C6H12O6. Carbon, oxygen. What's missing? If I've got carbon and oxygen, what's missing? Hydrogen. And that hydrogen comes from the water molecule that was split during the light reactions. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. This is an overview, not detailed at all, and that may make it a little confusing at first. So now we're going to break that down into these two steps, light reactions and the Calvin cycle. Okay? So you can cross off the next slide. We're not going to, that did not uh, display correctly. So you can cross that off. Okay? So this slide details the light reaction. So what I would do if I were you, I would draw a sun in the corner of this slide. I would draw a sun in the corner of this slide because this slide requires sunlight. This is the light reactions. So light hits the chlorophyll, which is in the chloroplast, and sunlight then causes the chlorophyll to vibrate, to become energized. And what happens then, that increase in energy breaks apart hydrogen and oxygen in a water molecule. Now, at this point, that oxygen is not needed, so the plant releases it into the air. So when people say plants release oxygen, this is when they do this, during the light reactions. Okay? The hydrogen the plant still needs, because remember, you've got to add that to the carbon dioxide to create a sugar. So the hydrogen is attached to NADPH, and we call this the light reaction. Okay? So water is broken apart using energy from the sun. The oxygen is released. The hydrogen is saved for later use. Okay? Any questions on the light reaction, step one? Okay. Step two then, oops, is the Calvin cycle. In the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is joined to hydrogen, which has come from the light reactions in NADPH, to form glucose. And then glucose can be bonded to itself and other sugars to create a wide range of other carbohydrates, including many that we've talked about, like cellulose, starch. These are plant carbohydrates. Okay? Any questions on the Kelvin cycle? No. Yes. What question? So then last thing is just the parts of the chloroplast for today. So in a chloroplast, okay, a chloroplast, remember, it's a membrane-bound organelle. So the fluid inside the chloroplast is called the stroma. And then there are stacks, like green stacks of pancakes, like green pancakes. Each pancake is called a thylakoid. And then the stacks of thylakoids are called a grana. Okay? Granum is singular. Okay? The thylakoids are the location where chlorophyll is found. Okay? Now I'm going to stop sharing, right, and stop recording for today. I'll upload these notes so that they're available.